All right, good morning, everybody. How we doing? All right, a little more feedback this time. Hey, do you guys know the World Cup was just played? Like 3 people watched it. Good job, guys. France, Viva la France, won 4-2. Way to go. So there's your, see, we don't hate soccer here. All right. Couple things. I just want to welcome all our people watching online. We're so glad that you guys are watching. I get texts from you guys saying, here I am. Hey, let us know on either YouTube or Facebook that you're watching live. We'd love to hear from you. And secondly, if you look on the screen, there's like a little phone number there. That's a text message number. And we will be doing a post-sermon podcast after this where we talk about all the stuff that we're talking about. So if you have any questions as we're going through it, just text us and we'll get to them. And then, secondly, this morning, we're talking about forgiveness, which forgiveness is one of those subjects, it doesn't even need an intro. And the reason it doesn't need an intro, because you have somebody in your life that you have had to forgive, or you have forgiven, or there's still like this issue. In fact, it's right now. In fact, for a lot of you, right now, when I think about the person you have to forgive, you can kind of force it from your mind, check your email, check your Facebook, something, so you don't have to think about it. But if you were to sit here and put everything down for a second, you would think of that person. And so this morning, we're going to be talking about it, primarily because in the past week, I've been getting phone calls and emails and text messages and personal meetings where people have really walked me through some of the darkness they're facing, and it's challenging. In fact, this morning, we're going to talk specifically about forgiveness within affairs. And so I wanted to warn you and kind of prepare you, but I want you to stay for the whole thing because I think this is what Jesus does, is he allows us to forgive in the most vulnerable places of our lives. But we would agree, everyone here would be like, all right, Chris, we should probably all forgive. Like everyone here is like, yeah, that's something. But it goes along the lines of like, we should forgive like we should follow the speed limit. Like, right? Or texting and driving is bad. Don't text and drive. But don't raise your hand. How many of you guys have texted and driven because that you just couldn't wait? I said don't raise your hands. There's this part, right? Like, you're like, okay, listen, forgiveness is important, but there's some stuff that kind of like, that crosses the line, I get a pass, right? We would say that. And there's 3 reasons primarily for this. I've been thinking about it, and these are 3 reasons I made up. I didn't find them anywhere. Here's number 1. Number 1, we don't forgive because we don't want people to think we are okay with what they did, right? And so what happens is like it feels weird every time we get together with people that we need to forgive or have hurt us, and it's like I can't talk. It's like we have before we can come together for our summit, we need to have some pre-negotiated things. You need to admit that you're wrong, and we need to come to like consensus, maybe like a payout of some sort, and then we can have a summit to meet again. I mean, it's kind of like how we deal with China or North Korea or Iran. Like there's just some things we need to get taken care of before we can actually meet. And so every time you see people, you're always kind of wanting to either remind them with a word or with a look or with a nonverbal. Okay, that's number 1. We got to feel like we got to remind people. The second one is we don't feel people deserve forgiveness. We're like, listen, if you knew what they did to me, you would be in agreement that they deserve a lot of pain and punishment, and justice needs to come and get them because they are bad. And so for me to forgive them, they might think that it wasn't that bad. And thirdly, we can't just forgive and forget. Because if we just forgive and forget, that's ultimately going to bring us back to point number 1. We don't want to think we're okay with what they did. And we want to get hurt again. And so, man, there's some really positive things about boundaries and really healthy things about telling people like this far but no further. But the reality is, if there's something in our hearts that's not allowing us to get past this place where we let the grudge go, it's kind of like drinking poison and hoping somebody else dies, isn't it? It's like this thing where I'm feeling angry and it's in me and the person doesn't even feel it. Or maybe they do. And your anger and your silence or your words over social media are really giving you the justice, but it feels like it's never enough. And so this morning, I want us to see how God feels about this thing of forgiveness. And it's going to get intense for a little bit, and I'm really excited about it because, well, we don't do anything low-key here. All right. If you don't have a Bible, I want you to raise your hand and wave it in the air, and a Bible will come to you. If you don't have a Bible at all, this is our gift to you. If you forgot yours, use ours, and we would love for you to have a copy of God's Word while you're here. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 18, and it's going to start at verse 21. It's got like one verse here on page 823 of the Bibles we're passing out. And then we're going to be walking through a parable. We're in this series called Parables that Pastor Phil brought us through for the past 2 weeks. And a parable is a story that goes alongside real life. So it's a made-up story by Jesus that goes alongside real life to give us a point or the moral of the story. And we're going to find that out here on what he has to say about forgiveness. You guys ready for this? Matthew 18, starting at verse 21. Then Peter came up and said to him, that him is Jesus. Jesus has just had a discussion with the disciples about church discipline, about, that phrase that a lot of people misquote, where two or three are gathered, there I am among you. That doesn't mean, listen to me, I need you guys to stop saying this. It doesn't mean that Jesus is only there when you have two or three. So because people say this, well, we just have two or three gathered, so we know that Jesus is here. No, he's here everywhere. All right, you have access to God all over the place. Sorry, that was a for free rant. Okay. So Peter came up and said to him, after he's gone over this thing about, forgiveness and how it works, says, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Now, when you read this, you're seeing here's Peter. He's trying to set up a strategy for forgiveness. Because, listen, we've all been hurt. You've been hurt. I've been hurt. And when you're hurt, you're like, okay, how many times do I take him back? How many times do I be like, nah, it's okay? And what he's saying is like, what are my boundaries? Jesus, help me out here. Give me some boundaries. Like there are some pretty awful people out there. They have done some really awful things to me. What's my limit? And Jesus says to him. Now, I'm thinking when I read this, Jesus is going to respond back with like a quip of like, I don't know, when was the last time you forgave? And just going to do like a banter back and forth with questions. That's sort of how I feel like Jesus typically answers. He doesn't ever give you like a straightforward answer and makes it simple. But Jesus says something even more weird than asking like the question of like, I don't know, when have you forgiven? He says, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. In other words, Peter's looking for the boundary and Jesus gives him infinite, right? Because it's not, man, it would be really difficult. 7 I can remember. I can do 7. I can count that right here. Good to go. 77, you run out of fingers and toes, and then it's awkward. You have to pull out, like, a notebook everywhere you go. No, you're on 67. No, I got 63. I'm on, what are you talking about? 63. All right, so he's saying here there's an infinite level of forgiveness. And so to the boundary question that Peter asked, because Peter's saying, what are my boundaries? And the response is, when it comes to forgiveness, you don't got none. To which people are going, no, Chris, I don't really think you understand what happened in my story. No, if you would know my story, and it's been bad. Like, it was hard, and it was dark, and it hurt. It wasn't just like emotional hurt. It was like real physical hurt. Do you think Jesus was talking to me? Because whenever I talk about forgiveness, in general, everyone gives themselves a pass. Right? We're like, I know, Chris, that's so true for everybody else. Man, those people, they need to get past that. And it's just inevitable. Like, it's like just something in you goes, that's so good for him. And so here it is. Jesus is going to, because Peter's probably thinking that too. He's like, okay, well, 77 is for me. Maybe he meant 7. And, Peter's just one of those guys that's going to probably try and find the out here. But Jesus is like, let me explain it to you in a story. And then he just goes off on this incredible story. And I wish I could preach like that, where I just like, we should do this. Like, just have question and answer time. You ask me a question, I'll start telling stories. But here's what Jesus does. It makes preaching way simpler when you just kind of make up stuff on the fly. But Jesus can do this because he's Jesus. All right, so he goes, therefore, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his servants. Now, when I think servants, can I just tell you, I just in general think about like the housekeeper. all right, or maybe the butler, the driver. I think about house-type servants, and it's not that kind of servant. All right, we're talking more like public servants, like Secretary of the Treasury or Secretary of Defense or something along those lines of Secretary of Education, something along those. It's like high up there servant. Servant, I feel like in our words we miss it. And the reason we know that is because of this next verse 24. So he's settling accounts with the servants, and when he began to settle, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents, which you're like, oh, what is that, like a couple $1,000s? No, it's more like $5 billion. $5 billion, okay? So you're like, that's a lot. Now, listen, last time I checked, even if you're like Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or Zuckerberg, in general, you're not telling the housekeeper, hey, go out and get us some food for dinner and 75 Rolls Royces. In general, you don't do that, right? So you don't have that much money to be in debt with unless you have a severe gambling problem. I don't know. Like, this is like more than severe. At some point, every casino would cut you off before you hit 1 billion, I'm pretty sure. And so what it is all kings in this time, they brought their own money to the table. Do you guys know this? It's like when Caesar's face is on the coin, it's literally his money. So you bring your army, you bring your people and your money. The public treasury is sort of like your treasury. You with me? And so when it comes to hiring the police and fire and building roads, that's coming out of your account. That's sort of how it worked back in the day with the king. It's all his money. And since he could not pay, his master ordered him to be sold, and this is really just generous of him and loving, with his wife and children and all that he had, and payment to be made. And I bet you they didn't even make a dent in the $5 billion. I mean, listen, he might have an amazing wife, but she's not $5 billion worth. All right, so I'm just saying. All right, so the servant fell on his knees. All right, he's imploring him, and he says, have patience. All right, this word, have patience with me, and listen, I'll pay you back. How many times you heard that one? No, I'm going to pay you back, man. I got you. I just need a little more time. Listen, $5 billion, I don't care how much time you have, you ain't paying it back. But this word patience, the one that he's pleading, he says, listen, he used this word patience, and where are my Greek people who love nerdy things like this? Where are you guys at? Okay, one. All right, awesome. This is for you, Jennifer. All right, this word is macrothumeo, all right? Macro, everyone knows what that means. It means long or big or large. Thumeo, you're probably not familiar with that, but that's suffering, okay? So macrothumeo, long suffering. Be long suffering with me. Okay, what he's saying is, here's what happened. You know how it is when your boy owes you some money? Let's just call it a solid G, right? He owes you $1,000. And you're like, every time you see him, there's a part of you that goes like, so you got that check? I'll take 100 right now. I can make a down payment. I have a whiteboard in my house. I used to do this with people, by the way. I'd have a whiteboard in my house, and I'd be like, 1,000, cross it out, 900. The bank is in session. Now, we start charging interest pretty soon. Now, there's this reality. We do that, don't we? We're like, I want my money. And you remember, it's amazing. You can't remember, how to count to 25, but you can remember when someone owes you $1,000. And you can remember how much they pay you. And for some reason, you got that all squared away in a very simple plan. Be patient with me. Don't bring it up with me for a long, 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 infinite time. And I'll pay you everything. And then out of pity, and this is where you say, no, out of foolishness, you aren't getting $5 billion back. Out of pity for him, the master of the servant released him. Okay, he lets him go out of jail. All right, release it. And then he goes, debt canceled. And he lets everybody know. He lets everybody know. This is a public servant guy, so everybody knows. It's like, hey, I canceled the debt. Don't worry about it. When you see him, you don't have to give him the shade. You're like, yeah, we know you are our king. So you don't listen, it's canceled. I forgave him. And this word pity, listen, it's not because he really looked into the situation and he goes, oh, he's really bad at math, and my bad, I'm making him Secretary of the Treasury. He misplaced a couple funds, and next thing you know, we can't pay our police force for the next 10 years. Right? That's not what happened. It was either out of unbelievable corruption or negligence that this guy is down $5 billion. But out of his sheer need, and all he's saying is like, I don't want to go to jail. I don't want my wife and my children. Don't send my wife and my children and me to jail, please. And out of his need for forgiveness, he cancels the debt. Now, here's the thing. The reason I love that Jesus is using a money story, because it's always a debt. All sin against a person is a debt. And it can look like this, like physical debt, but he absorbs the debt. The king absorbs the debt. And I was trying to think about how to explain this. Recently we had dinner with the Fords. They're a fun couple, Trey and Megan. They just had their baby Paige, and they invited our 3 kids, first mistake, all over to their house. And you don't know this because when you have a baby, you don't know how like toddlers operate, right? Because you're just like, it's so cute. Here's my baby next to this really expensive thing, next to this expensive thing, and she doesn't move. Isn't it beautiful? Right? That's what you do. And then you don't realize that everything that's within touching space will die, break, or explode. And so listen, when we have 3 kids now, and our third, like, I feel bad for him. We don't know where he is half the time. So I look up. I hear a big crash. My first thought is, what did Austin or Jet do? And I'm looking at him like, oh, they're right there. And so I'm like, oh, I'm good. Whatever just happened isn't my fault. I had that moment. And then I look up, and then there's Titus like holding this vase shard. Oh, great. And I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. And that's that awkward moment where you start packing everything up. Oh, we need to get out of here. Oh, gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And what happened is, it's not like, and Trey and Megan then go like, all right, that's $157.93. Here's your bill. No problem. Just pay it at your own convenience. We'll have set up some monthly plans for you to pay this back. No, what they did is they absorbed the debt. They absorbed it. They paid for it. And that's how it works with this king, only it's not $157.93, it's $5 billion. The king forgave a huge debt. Now, you would think the servant would be going on yippee-skippy, sharing the joy with everybody. But when that same servant went out, verse 28, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii, which you're like, that must be like a couple dollars. No, it's significant. $8,200. It's like getting a 2012 Kia Forte, all right? Autotrader.com. Go check it out. All right, and he owed him $8,200, and seizing him, he began to choke him, saying, I want my $8,200. So his fellow servant fell down and pleaded with him, and he uses the same words, have patience, macrothemeo, with me, and I will pay you. He refused and put him in prison until he should pay the debt. Now, this is significant. The forgiven could not forgive. And this is important. The $8,200 is significant. Because I think sometimes when we read the stories, it's like 20 cents. No, when you, if you don't have a car in this city, $8,200 is a big deal. And so when it comes down to a car payment, house payment, your lease, your mortgage, we're talking in that kind of money. This is your savings. Oh, I just got laid off, and now I need that money because I don't think that the king kept him employed. Like, he lost his job but didn't know $5 billion. It was a good day for him. But now he needs $8,200 to survive, and he's choking a guy out for it, right? He needs the money. I mean, you can understand it. It's just the reason you can't understand it is when that same day you were just forgiven $5 billion. But $8,200 is still $8,200. And the reason I bring that up is because a lot of us have a lot of pain that's significant. And there are people that have taken a debt on our lives, and it's no small change. It's big change, and it's a big deal, and it hurt very bad, and that person owes. Does that make sense? So watch what happens. Remember, when he got forgiven $5 billion, it was like no small deal. This was on the news. Like, and, Larry Las Vegas, who was Secretary of the Treasury, just was forgiven his full debt. When his fellow servants saw what had taken place, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their master all that had taken place. Then his master summoned him and said to him, "You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. And should not you have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you?" And in anger, his master delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all his debt. Which you're like, yeah, get him. Until you read this last verse. Verse 34 is the story. Then verse 35 is back to Peter. This is right back to Peter. Peter asks, how many times do I have to forgive somebody? 7 times? Jesus like, not 7 times, but 77 times. And then tells the story and then lays this down on him. He says, and so also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you, disciples, which you're just like, whoa, Jesus, we're on your team here. If you do not forgive your brother from your heart. You see, the forgiven forgive. This is what Christians do. If you're wondering, what is one of the primary, if it's a tenet, I don't like calling it a tenet, but what's one of the things that we as Christians do? We forgive. And you're like, well, what's the limit? What's the boundary? Where can I not forgive? Where can I kind of like put a check on the forgiveness and I don't have to be vulnerable and I can kind of hide over here and I can not have to deal with it? And Jesus is like, never. This is what Christians do. To a point which he's saying, I don't know if you understand salvation unless you understand forgiveness. And here's why. You see, the king in the story is God, right? Like no one's like, what? God? Yeah. The king in the story is God, and all of us, each person, you individually, are the servant, right? The one that's like Secretary of the Treasury who just bet $5 billion on red thinking we'll pay for 10 more years of police force, and then you bad gamble. You're in debt because of your sin and your darkness, and Jesus, instead of being like, well, let's put him in prison forever, hell said, you know what? I will pay the debt for him. And so God absorbed the debt. Jesus took on your sin, took on your shame, took on your pain, took it all on himself, and died on that cross, rose to the dead, which is why it's hard for me to believe that you have a saving relationship with Jesus if you're like, do you look what this person did to me? And I'd say, yes, I understand that. I'm not minimizing it, but look what Jesus did for you. Does that make sense? Because here's what you're saying. If you don't, Chris, you don't understand what that person did to me, it's greater than what God did to Jesus for my sin. That's what you're saying when you can't forgive. You're saying that I'm my own God and I have my own sort of justice system. That person does not deserve mercy. I'm going to put them in prison until they pay the debt. You know what happens? You don't ever get freed from the prison of your soul. Did you know that? I think this is the part where we say, forgive others, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. You cannot get peace in this life or in the one to come until you deal with that is so dark inside your heart. Because what you're saying when you don't is that Jesus, what you did on that cross, need a little more bloodshed to forgive that one. They're outside your grace. And that's a dangerous place to put yourself. And this is why I wanted us to go on this thing of affairs, because affairs are like the most vulnerable place. In fact, I have several couples I want to come up here. In fact, I have 3 couples that are going to be coming up, and you're like, 3 couples? 3 couples at our church. I didn't have to go find them at different churches and be like, hey, we're doing this thing on affairs. It was more like as I was sitting there, prompted, I was like, hey, it would be probably cool to have a live interview with someone who had an affair at our church and that has been restored. And I was like, I know this person, I know this person, I know this person. I was like, so I got up to 3 couples and I stopped because we didn't have room on the stage. So what I wanted you to see with is all these couples here have been through and been restored from an affair. Think about that. And here's what I know. If there's the 3 that we do know about, there's probably like 20 in here that we don't. And so I wanted, even if you've never had an affair, I know that you've been hurt by somebody. And the thing about what makes this so special with married couples is that they see the person that has hurt them every single day, and they somehow have to forgive and then treat them as if their sins are white as snow. And so I'm going to start with Jessica and Tony. Tony, would you mind telling us your story? And then specifically, I want you answer the question, how did you get over the not having to remind them of what they did was not okay all the time? So Tony and Jessica. Jessica, if you didn't know that, Jessica is our church admin. Isn't that fun? We love Jessica. And then, so Tony, tell the story and let's get into it.
Sure. So I'm going to try and condense this into like 2 minutes. So lots of things are obviously going to get skipped. But Jessica and I have been together since 2005, so our sophomore year of high school. So what is that, 13 years now? And we've been married for 8 of those years. She went off to college. She got saved in college. I was not a Christian at the time, but we got married our senior year.
Did you chase her to her college?
I did. Yes.
You were going to a different school and you changed schools just to follow her?
Going to Texas A&M, doing the military route with the Corps, and then left that to go and make the relationship work. So, yes, abandoned everything, went over there, and was kind of trying to figure out how to pay off my student loans that I had from A&M while accruing private university student loans at the same time. That was fun. And so I was working 70 to 80 hours a week. I was taking 20, 21 credit hours a semester, just super busy all the time. And my free time that I did have, I would spend with friends trying to relax and just, I don't know, de-stress. But what ended up happening was I didn't spend a whole lot of time with her in kind of the final years of that time. And so after we got married, it was probably a month into marriage or so. I randomly came home from work at a time I wasn't supposed to, and I walked in on the affair happening. And it was a good friend of mine that lived with me at the time. And yeah, that was a pretty rough thing. So I gave a call to a family that we had allowed to speak into our lives for a little while, and he said, you know what? Why don't you come out to Austin, because we live like 2.5 hours northwest of here at that time. Come out to Austin and come and chat with a couple of guys, and we'll just talk about it. And so when we did, when I came out here to go talk with those guys, one of the things that they had kind of were talking about is how a lot of men don't take responsibility for where their relationships are at. And I was even more angry after I left Austin than I was before I came, because on the drive home, I was just thinking, yeah, but I didn't do anything. Like, none of this is my fault. If she just hadn't have done anything, then we'd be good. And so I gave him a call when I got back the next day, and I just said, you know what, clearly my way's not working. I'm a month in, and we've already filed for divorce. So can you help me out? And his response was just, this is going to be one of the most challenging things you've ever done, because you don't believe what we believe.
So you weren't a Christian at this time?
I was not a Christian at this time. And I said, well, I don't understand, right? Like, if I forgive her, then we're good, right? And he goes, yeah, but you need to learn how to forgive her the way Christians forgive. And what he meant by that was just the fact that when Jesus, abolishes the sin in our lives, like, he doesn't bring it up anymore, doesn't see us with that anymore. And at that point in time, we used to jab each other all the time. She might say something innocent like, yeah, well, I don't trust him. He sometimes forgets to take out the trash, and, I might come back with, yeah, well, at least I don't have affairs in our relationship. And just, not great about that. Not happy. But anyway, I had to learn how to forgive and just kind of let that go. And then we put boundaries in our lives to kind of help ensure that stuff didn't take place anymore. Yeah.
And Jessica, how did you get past the shame of that, especially kind of moving past this place where he would remind you for a while, and then how did you overcome that?
Okay. Well, I think the hardest part about the shame was just that I started to isolate after it all happened, and I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. I obviously didn't want to bring it up with Tony and have him relive the hurt. And so year 1 went by, year 2 went by, and there was still that guilt lingering there in my head. And so I had just read a book that told me that if I had guilt left over, I should try asking God for forgiveness out loud. And so I was like, that's kind of strange. I kind of feel like I'm talking to myself. I always pray in my head. So I'm like, out loud, that's kind of weird. But I tried doing it one day in my room by myself. And what I basically said is, God, I know I messed up. Will you please forgive me and take this guilt away from me? And so after that, I just felt like a heaviness was lifted. And then I just not there anymore. So
that's awesome. Appreciate that, Jessica. Thank you. Ryan, so tell us your story. Give us a 2-minute recap, and then I want you to answer how did you love your husband when he wasn't changing? And then secondly, how were you able to forgive and not see your husband as a cheater, pumpkin eater, and as a leader?
Well, I've known Michael now for almost 12 years. We met at the office. I was on a business trip traveling, and at that time you had to check out a laptop. And he joined the team while I was out. And he came up to collect the laptop from me, introduced himself, and mentioned my name, which he mispronounced. He said, and I just responded very badly, it's Araya. Get it right. And he saw that as a challenge to be had, and he kept coming by my desk and chit-chatting, and I had really no interest in Michael whatsoever. But he eventually wore on me, and I fell for him. I knew he was very different from me. He knew he was kind of a partier. I'm very organized, very structured, balanced, and I had to really pray to God the relationship to start with. And I felt God telling me, this is where I want you to be. This is who I have for you in your life. It's going to be hard. You're going to go through some real challenges. But in the end, you're going to have victory and you're going to have a testimony. And I didn't realize how hard it was going to be. Michael suffered from alcoholism during most of our relationship. He was gone most of the time. He had a gambling addiction. He was physically, verbally, mentally abusive and controlling. It was very, very difficult. And then 2 years ago, we joined Wells Branch Community Church, and it was a life changer for Michael. He changed, and all of those challenges and issues I'd been encountering, I saw a new man. But for him to become that new man, he had to come clean, and he had to tell me that he had had an affair. I was devastated. I thought I had gone through the worst, and now I was in a good place, and that rug came out from under my feet. And I couldn't talk to Michael. I couldn't look at him for about 4.5 days. It's like living in the same household where you're seeing day in and day out the person who's just hurt you and stabbed you in the heart. But I prayed to God. I looked to the cross, and I said, God, you said this was going to be hard, and you were right. And I thought I got through this, and now I have this. But, God, you're going to see me through the fire as you have every other fire. And I'm going to come out victorious over this. God, what do you want me to do? I had 2 choices, he said. I could unforgive, and I could live in hurt and anger and turmoil, or I could just forgive, let it go, and be at peace and find the joy. And I looked at a woman that I knew very well who had her husband had an affair on her years before, and where they were in their relationship, and they were so strong, and that's what I wanted, was that relationship. And finally, that week, of course, God spoke through a sermon I was listening to on the TV that talked about marriage being not being a contract to be broken, but instead to be a covenant between my spouse, myself, and God. And I said, God, I hear your words loud and clear. I'm looking to you, I'm trusting you, and I'm going to walk through this fire, and I'm going to come out on the other side forgiving Michael and loving him.
That's awesome.
And today, our marriage is stronger than ever before.
Yeah.
It is heading right to where I want it to be, and God delivers.
That's so good. Michael, how did your wife's love help you see the love of Jesus? Or maybe it was the love of Jesus helped you see your wife's love. How would you explain that?
Well, before I came clean with Araya and with God, I was 100% sure that there was going to be no forgiveness and that there was going to be a divorce. And that's what kept me from coming forward. But when I finally broke down to God and, trusted him, I saw his love. He showed his mercy.
Yeah.
And showing me what I wasn't expecting, which was a divorce and forgiveness. But, I just praise God for what he's doing.
Amen. Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. Yeah. Nicole, tell us your story, and then I want you to answer the question of how did you battle depression even through this? And then we're going to let Andrew tell the story of forgiveness.
I really hate being last after that.
Yeah.
So I've been battling with depression for a very long time. And when I say battling with depression, not like sad mopey days. I mean, there's plenty of that, I'm sure. But I'm talking clinically, still on medicine, however many years later, depressed. About 6 months into my marriage, oh, this is Andrew, hi. We've been married for 5.5 years. About 6 months in, my depression just kind of came to a head. I mean, Andrew can explain it a lot more because I've pretty much blacked out that whole 1.5 years of my life. And the way that it manifested itself in my life most was not feeling loved, specifically not feeling loved by my husband. And I started to reach out emotionally to pretty much anyone who would give me that love that I was craving. And I ended up having an affair with one of my high school crushes. It was like a one-time physical event with a long tail of emotional cheating, just constantly texting, seeking validation elsewhere.
Take it from there, Andrew.
All right, so what made this especially fun for me was I couldn't hold a job to save my life during this time. I had 5 jobs in the span of 1 year. So I was in the middle of that, and I just gotten laid off from a job on Friday morning, and it was Saturday morning when I was finally suspicious enough that I started reading her text messages, and it was very clear what was going on there. So that was a really fun 24-hour period.
And how did you, I mean, so there you've lost your job, you've found that your wife has been cheating on you. How do you have compassion to forgive at all to even begin with?
Yeah, that was kind of one of the coolest things, as strange as that sounds. That was one of the coolest things about going through this is I'd essentially been in a caretaker role for the 1.5 years prior to this. I would come home from work, and oftentimes my whole evening would go just to trying to get her to eat. She couldn't get out of bed, but she was crying because she was hungry, and I just had to abandon everything extraneous in life to care for her. So I was 1.5 years into this when I found out about the affair. But my heart was just so bent on seeing her well, and God just really gave me a ridiculous ability to forgive her and to continue to show her love and grace. He made it easy, as strange as that sounds. It didn't take away the emotional hurt that was still there. It was still as raw as can be. But as far as forgiving her, he made that surprisingly easy.
And then, so it didn't, whenever you found out, it didn't just like, and we're done. Tell me about that process of like getting past, because there was a point in which you kind of had to ask her to move out, or.
Yeah, so of course when she was initially confronted, I'll never talk to him again, I'll block him on all social media, blah, 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 that's how it goes. And I was optimistic and I believed her, but here we were 2 months after that date and she was still texting him, and I feel like God really led me to confront her and to be maybe a bit more forceful than I had been in the previous years. I just told her, hey, your parents are ready to come pick you up. They're going to take your phone from you, and you're going to go back to your hometown, and you're going to live there until you figure out what you're doing with your life. It wasn't divorce. That wasn't being threatened at all, but you can only live in the house with someone for so long when they're continuing to talk to someone else and really drag you through hell.
Yeah. Tell me about your marriage now. Like, how many years has it been, and like, how would you say the quality is now?
Yeah, so it was about 3 years ago that healing began. And it was shortly after I laid down the ultimatum, so to speak, that she opened up to a small group at our church and said, hey, I've been struggling with depression for years now. And another week or two after that, she opened up to a smaller group of ladies and said, hey, I had an affair. So that was June of 2015. And since then, we've been on a steady trajectory of healing. I'd say most of it happened right then and there when she confessed. It was years of prayer being answered in the moment. And really just looking back, I wouldn't wish this on anyone, but there's a richness there. There's a richness in having fought through this that would not be there otherwise. I was never so close to God as I was during that time. I just felt his love and grace and a peace that truly didn't make sense during that time. And it's really just brought a richness to our marriage, I would say.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks everybody. Would you guys give it up for these guys for sharing? I mean, isn't that incredible? I think when you hear that, there's this disconnect of like they can even sort of joke about it and they can talk about it so freely. How does that happen? That's the grace of God. Taking the dark spots and stains on your soul and erasing them and bringing freedom and wholeness. And so I'm going to ask you this question really pointedly. Remember, this is for you, not for the person you think this would be great for them to hear. For you. Who do you need to forgive? It might be a parent. It might be an ex. It might be a child. It might be a coworker. It might be a boss, an employee. Who is it that you have this sort of grudge, and instead of exacting any justice, you are actually, in a sense, just tormenting yourself? Who is it that you're withholding that grace from? I want you to kind of wrap that in your head. And this morning, as you're thinking about that, we're going to have some baptisms. We're really excited about this. One of the things we do here at Wells Branch Community Church, we introduce people into a life-changing relationship with Jesus. And what this demonstrates is their sins being washed clean. It doesn't wash their sins clean. It's just a public confession of faith. And when they go under the water, it's saying, I'm dead to my sin. And coming out, I'm alive in Christ. But it's acknowledging that there was sin in their life, $5 billion worth. And Jesus, instead of holding it over your head, reminding you of how guilty you actually are, how awful a person you really are, said, no, I won't bring it up again. And if Jesus can do that for you, can you do that for someone else? If you're not a Christian here this morning, that might sound crazy. And to Tony, it was, because he didn't believe. But then over time of interacting with Christians and seeing how Christians forgave, and this is just something they did, he was introduced to Jesus Christ as his Savior. And he is a full-fledged follower of Christ. And I want that for you. So this morning, would you believe that Jesus died on the cross for your sins, rose from the dead, and walk into everlasting life with us? And if you're not a Christian, my question still stands. Who is it that you need to forgive? Because this is what Christians do. Would you pray with me? Father, I'm so grateful for how you make yourself manifest in our stories. Lord, how you have changed us, how you have made us victorious in you. And God, I'm praying this morning that someone for the first time might acknowledge their sin and say, I need forgiveness. I'm $5 billion in debt and I can't pay it. Please have mercy on me, a sinner. And God, I pray that they would feel the full weight of forgiveness being lifted off their shoulders as they trust you. And God, I'm praying they simply say, Jesus, save me, forgive me. And you would do it as they come to believe that you died on the cross for their sin and rose from the dead. And Father, would your Holy Spirit convict people? Would they leave here with a hunger or a lasting sort of impression on their soul that you won't let them forget, God, that name? Lord, I even pray they'd write it down right now of whoever the name of the person they know they need to forgive, and maybe they put that name in the giving box with a way to for us to contact them. God, would you please have them do that? And we can follow up to make sure that forgiveness is actually happening and we're not just giving lip service to a service, but rather having an interaction with the Holy God who wants to transform us by your power and your grace. So God, please, as we baptize people symbolizing their unbelievable forgiveness, would you put on our hearts who we need to forgive? It's in Jesus' name we pray.